So welcome everyone to Workforce Wednesday. Today our topic is workforce preparation and employability skills. And our presenter today is Sandy Goodman, the director of the National College Transition Network, and we're very excited to have her. Today is October 23rd, and my name is Olga Escamilla. I'd like to welcome our presenter. Again, our presenter is Sandy Goodman, and she currently serves as a director at the National College Transition Network. She's the lead author of the College Transition Toolkit, and she edited the Integrating Career Awareness Curriculum Guide and the College and Career Navigator Training Manual. So if anybody's used the Integrating Career Awareness, yay, we love it. So prior to joining the college transition team, she directed a career ladders project called Partnership for Automotive Career Education, or PACE. Sandy has a BA in Women's Studies, Social Thought, and Political Economy from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and an MPA from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. So again, we are honored to have Sandy presenting for Texas.
Great. Thank you so much, Olga. And I'm so happy to be with all of my friends from Texas and from PD Train. It's been a while since I've been out there, but I appreciate the shout-outs I see from Liz Moya, and I recognize some other names, and I know you all use a lot of our products like the Integrating Career Awareness curriculum, because I trained a bunch of your PD folks years ago on it, and I'm just really glad to be in touch with you and always want to do what I can to partner with TCAL and with PD Train. And hello, friends in Texas. This session that Olga invited me to do is on just a very brief introduction to workforce preparation and employability skills. And what our goals are today, are to briefly define workforce preparation activities really as they're identified in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, similar to employability skills, which are part of the CTE framework. Get into a little bit of depth in the short amount of time we have about what these skills are, what they mean, and then introduce some resources that you can use for program and curriculum design. So first, let me say that there are many, many terms and frameworks and ways of categorizing the skills that we're talking about today. Here's just a barrage of them to begin with, and you'll recognize them. Soft skills, employability skills, foundational skills, professional skills, transferable skills, essential skills, workforce preparation, life skills, personal success skills, college and career readiness skills, power skills, work ethic, non-cognitive skills, human skills, self-efficacy, social emotional learning, and 21st century skills. So that was a barrage of maybe 20 different terms for a very similar set of skills, and I probably didn't even list all of them. And so what my concern is less about sort of how we categorize and classify and name these skills or which framework we use, but really how to get a little bit deeper into why these skills, how to teach them, and what kind of resources we can use. So the good news about this plentiful number of frameworks and skills is that means that we can usually find some kind of resource and crosswalk it for our needs. I'm sure you have seen all of these terms before. But the framework that we're going to use for this session is really directly from the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And as I'm sure you know, WIOA says directly that workforce preparation activities or workforce preparation skills have to be integrated into all aspects of adult education instruction. So what are those skills? I'm going to invite you to look at them, and I'm just going to describe them a little bit. So basic academic skills. That's the applying of reading, writing, math strategies to our everyday tasks, problems, and situations that we encounter at work, in our home and educational life. Critical thinking, using thinking skills, using reasoning skills to analyze, solve problems, to plan and organize, and make sound decisions. It also includes thinking creatively, looking, as we say, outside the box for solutions to challenges. Digital literacy, another way that this is often described, is problem solving in a technology-rich environment, using technology, different kinds of technology tools to work more effectively, to get information, to help us be efficient in our everyday lives. Self-management is another one of the workforce preparation activities. We'll discuss it further in a few minutes, but this means these are the kinds of personal responsibility skills, having self-discipline, being able to be flexible and adaptable, having integrity and an ethical compass, being able to take an initiative. These are essential qualities of professionalism. They include willingness to learn, being able to be a self-directed learner, taking responsibility for personal and professional growth. Another skill is utilizing resources, and this is using resources strategically and effectively to accomplish tasks, knowing which tool to use for what job. Using information is about not just taking in and absorbing information, which is coming at us all the time, but being able to effectively understand it, to evaluate, and to use it in the right contexts. We talk a lot about working with others and teamwork. Working with others is having effective relationships. Again, being able to be a member of a team, respecting differences and diversity are examples of working with others. And then understanding systems is something we'll look at in a few minutes as well. So those are sort of these big buckets of skills that are listed in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And then down at the bottom, there's all these other additional buckets. So skills necessary for successful transition into and completion of post-secondary education and employment. And I'm sure you'd agree with me, and certainly the National College Transition Network has posited that all of these skills I just listed are certainly those skills that are necessary for successful transition. But this category might also include some of the things that aren't mentioned explicitly: college navigation, placement test preparation, understanding financial aid and how to finance post-secondary ed. Again, I think we could connect those specifics back to these other skills. And then the last category, big bucket, is other employability skills that increase an individual's preparation for the workforce. So again, big buckets. We could say that all of the skills I've just listed are effective for increasing an individual's preparation for the workforce, but we might also include some things that we typically consider workforce prep, like job readiness, resume, job search, interviewing. You can see that those kinds of skills aren't mentioned above, but they're included in part of this workforce preparation activity. So that's the skills. I'm going to just give you a minute to look at them, and then we're going to spend some time unpacking them, and I'll keep showing the slide just to refresh your memory about what they are. And of course, any number of these: critical thinking, utilizing resources, using information, could be unpacked, and a whole set of more specific and detailed skills could be listed, but we won't get into that here so much. What I do want to say about workforce preparation activities is, again, they are listed in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and they are called workforce preparation, and in some ways that's unfortunate because they aren't just skills or activities that prepare us for the workforce, but I think we could say that they're essential skills, they're 21st century skills, they're life skills. They are skills that are needed really to be successful in all aspects of life, in our work life, in our community life, our civic life, in our family life, and certainly they're necessary to be lifelong learners. So it's important, I think, to see them as much broader and much deeper than just skills that are needed for jobs. So they're different in that way than resume writing or interview skills, which are very concrete, specific for job search. And these are, as I said, more applicable in multiple contexts, and that's important. So the other thing about them is that in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act doesn't say integrate workforce preparation skills into just your career pathways or your integrated education and training or your career preparation programming. They're meant to be integrated into all kinds of classes of adult education, even if they're basic language instruction or high school equivalency prep. And as I said earlier, they really go beyond job readiness. They're not just, we haven't achieved workforce preparation activities if we're just helping students write a resume or just helping them do a job search. rather than thinking about these skills as skills that kind of take us away from academic skills, I think that you'll see as we go along that they really can reinforce academic skills. They can reinforce learning math, writing, reading, and language instruction. And they can reinforce academic skills, and they can be more broadly applied, but only if we're really explicit about that how we're teaching them. So what I mean by that is that it's important as we're teaching these skills or giving students opportunities to practice them that we're helping students understand, what does this have to do with my employment opportunity? What does this have to do with my everyday life? How do these skills help me be a more effective lifelong learner? And that's our job, to help students understand how these skills transfer to all different areas of their life and to be explicit about that, to help students identify, well, you're just here for high school equivalency prep and you're asking me to work in a team. What does that have to do with getting my high school equivalency? So it's up to us to say, we're teaching these skills about working in a team because beyond your GED, you're looking for other opportunities, and these are skills that will be important to your employment and your opportunities beyond high school equivalency. So that's what I mean about being explicit and also helping students understand how they can transfer to other goals. So why are these skills so important? Here's what the research says. This comes from a study called Hard Evidence About Soft Skills. And it says that non-cognitive skills, which are many of the skills we've talked about, some of the more, self-management, as an example, interpersonal communication skills. Let's think of those as non-cognitive skills. Persistence, resilience. Those kinds of skills predict educational attainment and labor market outcomes as strongly as measures of cognitive ability. So that means as strongly as measures of, our academic skills and achievement. So again, that's a response you can give to students. Why am I practicing communication or teamwork? Why are you asking me to become more self-aware about how I, operate in a team? Well, because your goals indicate that you will need to have these kind of skills in order to succeed in the labor market, no matter how strongly your GED skills are, no matter how strong your academic skills. And of course, examples of non-cognitive skills include conscientiousness, which is like the self-management under the workforce prep activities. Organizational skills are non-cognitive skills. Perseverance, self-discipline, also a feature of self-management. And again, social skills, working with others, all of these are the skills that predict educational attainment and labor market outcomes as strongly as cognitive ability. So the research also says that human skills aren't replaceable. So that's good news for us in this labor market where we're all thinking about whether we will have jobs and whether there will be roles for people and not just machines. Well, middle skills jobs that involve adaptability, problem solving, communication, and common sense will outlast jobs that involve things like traditional computation, production, or clerical occupations. So what we mean by that is that things like computation or clerical occupations are the things that are more likely to be automated, but the sort of more human skills like adaptability, problem solving, communication, the kinds of things that are reflected in workforce preparation, those are harder to replace. Those are harder to automate. And so helping our students recognize that those skills are so important in addition to technical skills and helping them develop those kinds of skills will really better equip them for a very uncertain, unstable labor market and offers them more opportunity for employment security above and beyond the impact of technology, because it is these essential skills that can't be replaced by automation. So that there's a lot to these skills as we can see, and the good news is that we can still learn these kind of skills. We can still learn these human skills. We can still learn these workforce preparation and activity skills, because research shows that with the right supports and effort, with a growth mindset and positive educational experiences, that's where all of you come in, adults can develop and enhance their personal success skills. So on one hand, we have this idea that we are who we are, and that's true, and we can embrace the uniqueness of each of us, but it doesn't mean that we can't still improve our communication, improve our ability to be self-aware, or improve um, our social skills and how we use and analyze information, for example, right? So let me just stop and ask if there's any questions just about this foundation that I've established here before we go on and take a closer look at these skills. So let's just take for a minute a closer look. At the end, I'm going to share a link with you of a little video that's on the Career One Stop site that talks a little bit about understanding systems. But you saw that that's one of the workforce preparation activity skills. So what does that mean? Understanding systems means we often think about it as, being able to understand parts of a whole and how they interact together to produce overall outcomes. If you've worked with folks in any kind of mechanical or technical occupations, we really think about systems as how each part of a machine work together and function. And that's one way of thinking about systems, but understanding systems is also about social systems and thinking about, if we're working in an organization, how different people have different roles and different assignments within a team. And that's part of how a team works together. It's not just come together and communicate and be open to other ideas. That's part of it, but also understanding how each of us plays a role and has tasks that if we fail to do them, we'll let down the whole team and we'll kind of, put a stop to the flow of operations, just like if something breaks down in a machine kind of system, it puts a stop to operations. So understanding systems also involves, recognizing and navigating systems that may be technical, they may be social or organizational, they may be cultural or institutional. So one way I think about this is, we talk a lot about students need to understand how to dress for success and how to dress for an interview. And one way of helping them think about it might be to think about systems. And, a workplace culture is different than a school culture, is different than your home culture, is different than being with your friends. And so that's a way of analyzing systems and understanding them. So what are the norms and expectations that are involved in a system? Could be a way of helping students get at this skill while also achieving something you're trying to, a message you're trying to send with them about you need to dress appropriately for different occasions. But rather than just wagging a finger and saying you can't wear that to the interview, maybe you could do something around systems and cultural norms and how they differ and comparing them and contrasting them. So that's just an example. And then how I use it in my work, talking to you in Texas is a great example. I often work in different states and different regions and different programs. And so my way of understanding systems is to recognize that states, although we all might come under, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, at the federal level, our states operate in different ways. We have different state policy terrain. We have different regional demographics. The labor market is different. So that's one way that I approach understanding systems. I might not learn deeply about different states I'm in, but I have a kind of metacognitive awareness that there are differences and that I need to pay attention to them and learn a little bit about them so that I navigate appropriately when I work with different folks. Another way that I use understanding systems in my work is that, and this is probably true for all of us, sometimes I'm the one in charge of a team and a project and I'm the facilitator. Other times I'm the consultant and I have a client. T-Qual could be an example. And I'm, following the lead of whoever's asked me to do some work for them. Or I'm simply at a conference session as a participant. I'm not there to be a trainer or a presenter. My role is to participate, fully in a different way. So that's another way I think about navigating and understanding systems and how I apply that to my work. So I'm going to ask you to kind of go through a similar exercise that I just went through. I described concretely what understanding systems looks like, and then I talked about how I use it in my work. And I want to give you a chance to think about this term self-management and take a few minutes to think about what does self-management look like, meaning what are some concrete examples of self-management? How do you know self-management when you see it or when you experience it in yourself? And then how have you used the skill of self-management in your work or your personal life recently? So take a few minutes, and then I just want to take a minute really to think and reflect on those questions. What does self-management look like? Meaning, what are some examples of self-management? What are indicators of self-management? What are behaviors of self-management? And how have you used the skills of self-management in your work or personal life? Self-management entails developing and or using tools to monitor your performance, your delivery, your commitments. Organizing and programming ourselves, our commitment, our responsibility, meeting deadlines. Setting up parts of a model and logical steps to achieve your desired goal. And setting up the parts of a model, frankly, could be also understanding systems and that you need to have those logical steps and that being able to follow them is your self-discipline and your attention to those goals that you've set for yourself. That might be one way to think about the interplay of the different skills. Describe a way that you've used self-management. I'm sure you used it many times even just today. Being proactive and anticipating needs of staff and department, especially the needs of new staff. Goal setting and planning, time management, communication skills. Going to bed on time, setting small goals, and making a concrete plan to meet a deadline. Communicating with coworkers and teammates to reach a goal. These are great examples. Managing time, workflow, communication are examples of self-management. Planning and using incremental goal setting for myself and encouraging it in my students by reflecting on my own lessons learned of setting goals and committing to follow them. I understand systems and processes, but I'm always open to change for the better. Self-management is being able to complete tasks without direct supervision. Yeah, so working independently. And Marie says this is something that is an everyday skill to make others and yourself more effective. Christy writes, balancing work and personal life, scheduling your life to prioritize your tasks, meeting deadlines. I just finished a short story and got it to my editor on time. That's a great example, I think, from Chris. And then got my lesson plan submitted. So there was definitely some prioritization and time management and juggling those writing tasks there, I'm sure. And then Liz says, I like to develop checklists and rubrics to remind me of the tasks at hand as well as the level of quality required. Amirani says, being more goal-oriented and focusing on time management, sticking to a schedule and a to-do list. And I'm just going to say these are such great examples, and sticking to a schedule and a to-do list. Mauro writes, being sure I understand the steps in correct order so that I'm able to communicate with my coworkers. Great. So these are really great examples. They're examples of what self-management means, and they are also, you can think, I'm sure, of many more examples of how you use them in your work. And in picturing that, hopefully that means you can also help your colleagues and your students become more self-aware of self-management and ways that they can develop those kind of skills. Great, so we're going to move on, and I just want to give you a minute to look again, because I don't have a handout. If we were in person, I would give you something to refresh your memory. So just remember these basic terms for the skills, and we're going to go on to another activity. And this is just to give you an example of very short example of an ELA lesson and the kinds of, this is again an English language arts lesson. It's not a career pathways lesson or an occupational skills training lesson or a career preparation lesson. It's just an English language arts lesson that could take place over a number of days. And here's the activities for this Create a Brochure for a Fitness Program lesson. Students will review a variety of brochure samples and compare the different purposes, styles, tones, etc. Using notes from a health education presentation, students will select brochure content. In groups, students will produce a brochure using word processing and design software. So just knowing those few activities that this lesson involves, where do you recognize workforce preparation activities? So where do you see that in the process of these activities, students are learning those workforce preparation activities? Which ones are they learning or practicing through this lesson? Again, those are basic academic skills, critical thinking, digital literacy, self-management, using resources, using information, working with others, understanding systems, skills necessary for transition, other employability skills for job readiness. Which of those do you think students are learning and practicing in these three activities that I've listed on this slide? So here's some of the things that you're all seeing. There's digital literacy, there's critical thinking, there's using Working with others, students are working in a team. Yeah, the digital literacy, they're word processing and using design software. They're thinking critically. They're thinking critically about and making choices about comparing the different purposes for writing, and then they're making choices about the kinds of information they're going to pull from their research into the brochure. Great. Anything else that hasn't come up? Using resources, absolutely. Basic academic skills, certainly they're applying reading, writing, language skills to the work. Using information and using resources. Excellent. So you see what I'm getting at, I think, here, which is that you don't have to be teaching a contextualized, career-focused, or occupational training content in order to be helping students learn and practice these skills. And you see it here in this ELA lesson, which is not about occupational pathways or career exploration. And I think you'll also see it here when we actually look at some college and career readiness standards, anchor standards, and I'm going to ask you again to make the connection. So let me just back up a minute and just remind you what the workforce preparation activities are. And then I'm going to read these. These are either anchor standards or mathematical practices from the college and career readiness skills. And I'm going to ask you to, again, just these are quick hits, but to type in what workforce preparation activities you can see aligning with or reinforcing this standard. So the first one is reading one. Read closely to determine what the text says explicitly and make logical inferences from it. Cite specific evidence to support conclusions drawn from the text. So go ahead just in a second, say what workforce preparation activities align with or reinforce or can be taught through a lesson that emphasizes this reading strand. I don't see anything new yet. I'm going to go ahead. So I see using information here. I see applied academic skills, certainly, and also critical thinking, making logical inferences, citing evidence. So we see here how the workforce preparation skills align very well with college and career readiness standards. Here's another one. This is the writing anchor standard 4. Write informative, explanatory texts to examine and convey complex ideas through the effective selection, organization, and analysis of content. So again, quick, now that I've modeled it once, go ahead quickly and just say what workforce preparation skills do you see here? Critical thinking, what else? Organization, self-management. I want to add working with others. Working with others includes any kind of communication really, or communicating effectively, so certainly you're trying to communicate here. Critical thinking, problem solving. I also, using information, certainly the writing comes from having explored other texts, applied academic skills, critical thinking, and then as I said, working with others because it's communication. And this is from Speaking and Listening 4. Present information, findings, and supporting evidence such that listeners can follow the line of reasoning and the organization. What workforce preparation activities are aligned here? Present information, findings, and supporting evidence such that listeners can follow the line of reasoning. So speaking skills for sure, so that's communication or working with others under the workforce preparation. Using information, using research, yep, you're getting it now. Working with others, using information, and using resources for sure. This one is from Writing 6. Use technology, including the internet, to produce and publish writing and interact and collaborate with others. What are the workforce preparation activities, skills that are reinforced, taught, and learned that align with these? Digital literacy, communication, using resources, working with others. So applied academic skills for sure. And then let's just do the math practice one. I know you're seeing exactly where I'm trying to get with this, but math isn't usually in the workforce preparation activities rubric. So these are the math practices. Number 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. What workforce preparation activities are involved in this math practice? Critical thinking, working with others, reasoning. Yeah. I don't even think I had reasoning but under critical thinking. And then this is a math practice number 5. Use appropriate tools strategically. There we have utilizing resources, because in the math practice you are thinking about different approaches, different tools you can use to solve a problem, and that's the same as using resources. I mean, it is using resources. Critical thinking and, of course, applied academic skills. So I go through that activity because I too often find, I mean, you'll know this from even your work with things like the Integrating Career Awareness curriculum, too often I find still, even in after all of our work on career pathways and the emphasis on employment and advancement in WIOA, I find that instructors sometimes say, well, you know, I'm busy with the academic skills and I can't be pulled in this other direction of teaching workforce preparation skills. Save that for a workshop. Save that for your workforce partner. I need to teach you reading, writing, math, and language. So I think it's just really important for us to recognize that there isn't a tension between them. They're not. They're the same goals, the academic skills goals that we have and the workforce preparation activities that we're trying to cultivate in students. Certainly there's the overlap when we're talking about all the things you named in the earlier activity: critical thinking, applied knowledge, digital literacy, communication, and working with others. So I just urge you in your practice and also working with colleagues as you develop curriculum and lessons to really think about how to integrate these skills. And again, going back to the earlier point, how to make them explicit for students so that they understand that these they're not just learning reading, writing, math, language, they are learning these other skills and how important they are to their employment and educational opportunities in the future, as well as their current success. So I've really emphasized that workforce preparation activities don't have to be taught in the context of workforce or career preparation in order to still be, you know, legitimately called workforce preparation. We've spent a lot of time looking at how workforce preparation skills reinforce academic learning and vice versa. But certainly they also lend themselves to contextualized curriculum and focusing particularly on occupational skill building. And in those cases, you can help students practice scenarios where they're using those skills that we just unpacked, but in the context of a particular occupation or workplace setting, and to help them see how we've used them in the classroom to solve a math problem, but they also can be used in a workplace scenario. So I just wanted to remind you of some of the sources for authentic workplace materials if you wanted to, even if you're not teaching in career pathways, but you wanted to help students understand how is critical thinking used in, you know, machine tooling, how is working in teams used in the hospitality industry, what have you, that these are sources to get some of that authentic information. And then I just wanted to tell you briefly about 2 courses. I've come to do these presentations and workshop sessions because I developed 2 courses for links, 2 self-paced online courses that focus on this content. So if you or colleagues wanted to get a little deeper into ideas for how to teach these skills and resources to use them, then I just wanted to let you know that there are these 2 courses. They're called, there's 2. The first one is called Introduction to Workforce Preparation and Employability Skills. The second is called Workforce Preparation Activities in the Classroom. And that goes deeper into contextualized instruction and how these align with deeper learning strategies. So the first is kind of more of a general overview like we're talking about today. The second is kind of digs in a little bit deeper into classroom instruction and some examples. They're self-paced. They're about 90 minutes or more to complete, and I'll leave this with you to look over later. I wanted to just tell you about some resources also that you can use for curriculum and instruction, but let me first look and see if there are any questions. I saw that there was a comment from Chris. If a person can't apply or connect academics to the workforce, then there is a disconnect. Students must learn how to apply academic skills to the workforce. I agree, for sure. And, okay, let me just run through these then. So there's another framework is the employability skills framework that also comes out of the U.S. Department of Ed, Octave, but the Career and Technical Education department, and there's a great checklist of skills that clearly align with workforce preparation activities that might be helpful. The Atlas PD program in Minnesota has a transition integration framework, so it's another example where they're using a different terminology for their framework, but they're completely crosswalkable skills to workforce preparation, and they really lay out great indicators about how students would practice and demonstrate these skills and at different levels and applied to different contexts. So they have a community context, an educational context, and a workplace context to show students, again, how they could practice these skills and why they would be relevant and how they'd be relevant in those different contexts. One framework that I'm getting, or materials that I'm getting really excited about is the New World of Work, which has lesson modules that you can download, I think, to address 10 or 11 of these similar skills that we're talking about. And another one similarly is Education Design Lab's 21st Century Skill Badges. Both the New World of Work and Ed Design Lab have a badge, assessment and badging system that I think would be quite accessible in our context. Another is Pennsylvania Foundational Skills Framework, and I have links to these at the end of my slides as well. Also another framework, similar overlapping skills, but with some good examples of what the indicators of these skills would look like as a way to guide curriculum and development lessons and activities to help students learn and practice these skills. Those are the links to the resources that I've mentioned. And then I just want to tell you to please keep your eye out. If you aren't already getting our newsletter, I hope that you will go online and sign up, because I'm leading a project called the Personal and Workplace Success Skills Digital Library, which is going to be all about collecting and creating a library, basically, of curriculum materials that can teach these very skills. So if you have suggestions for curriculum materials, send them to me, and we'll also keep your eye out, because we'll also be looking for AE sites and workforce centers to possibly pilot test some of the things that we're going to feature, just so we get some more lived experience of how these tools could be used, and we'll store them in the library. And let me just say, somebody asked, is there a cost associated? Nothing that I've listed here has a cost associated with it. They're all free online now. In the digital library, some things may be commercial, and most things will be free, we hope. Claire says that she's loving the New York for the CUNY career kits. I also really, really appreciate those, and the link is here. They teach, career exploration in the context of particular occupations. I think you'd want to also draw out explicitly where the workforce preparation activities that we've discussed here are embedded in those lessons.
Thank you so much, Sandy. What I've done is I've placed
where you are at, or your colleagues, if you're a program coordinator or director, where the teachers in your program are at. Would you say that most folks are explicitly incorporating these skills into their academic instruction, or they are, but they are not explicit about that? What I mean is, if you looked over a curriculum, would you see these explicitly kind of highlighted, or would you say they're there but they're not explicit, or would you say they're not there at all in general, if you're thinking about your own teaching or teachers in your program? They're there but not explicit, they're not there at all, or they're there and explicit, is my question to you in your own instruction.
One of the things that we've been doing is we've been providing the employability skills framework presentation throughout the state. So that one, I think many of our programs are getting more familiar with.
So you're talking about the
framework.
Yes. That's great. And so, of course, that's completely overlapping with what we're talking about in terms of workforce preparation.
So Joseph says many are currently in progress and evolving, and Elizabeth says, I think scope and delivery is inconsistent.
Yeah, oh, I see that now. I scrolled. Thank you.
Some programs, and I'm glad that you said this, because I like to say the same thing about some programs are incorporating workplace only into the integrated education and training courses. But I think it needs to be, as you said, incorporated into every course. And I love that. So there's more comments coming through.
Oh, great. And Christy says, we try to contextualize all our classes to employability and career pathways. We've used the framework as part of the training on the Content Standards 2.0. Great. And the framework, I assume Lorraine means, is the employability framework, which I think is, I'm a little regretful sometimes that in the language of the employability skills framework didn't make it into the legislation, since it is a U.S. DOE product, but it's pretty easy to crosswalk. I mean, there are different terms and different clustering of the same skills. So, but it would have been nice to have had that language alignment. Well, so that was my question for you all about how much work is left to do, explicit but present but not explicit or not there at all. And we've gotten some ideas about that. And Olga, I'm going to turn, if there aren't any other questions or comments about this piece of the presentation, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. We are so honored to have you presenting for us and sharing this information, and I'm looking forward to the Digital Skills Library.